Next up is one of the hottest topics on Cosmos, mesh security, and we'll have Miles. He'll moderate the panel, and we'll also have Mauro, Jake, and Chris coming up on panel. Please welcome them on the stage.
Who's ready to mesh it up? I mean, is mesh security even real? Like, all right, well, start praying to the demo gods. We're gonna try our best here. Let's go. Feel free to fill up the airwaves with
Absolutely.
like, fun commentary while we're.
So, in case anybody doesn't know, the Osmosis Grants Program recently funded a number of teams to develop mesh security and bring it to mainnet. This is an Interchain coalition initiative. It's also funded by a number of chains. And after a few months, we now have a working, hopefully, demo of mesh security that Jake will show in a moment.
Yeah, I'm pretty hyped. This has been a long time coming. And I'm really also excited to get to chat with just such amazing people here. Maybe we should do a quick round of intros while we're getting the screen set up. I'm Jake. I work on a few things, and one of them is mesh security. And I'm really, really excited about the potential for mesh security to really not just secure the interchain, but bring us all together a little bit more. We need a little bit more collaboration. Good vibes. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mauro from Confio. And I'm working on the backend part of mesh security with the Confio's team.
Cool. I'm Christopher. I worked on IBC before, and now I work on Onoma. I'm very impressed by the kind of mesh security hacker spirit. Different varieties of this concept have been floating around for years. If you go read, there's an old IBC issue, I think by June actually, on recursive tendermint. So running tendermint over IBC, one layer meta consensus between blockchains. We didn't have the term mesh security then, but I think it's very much in the Cosmos spirit, and excited to see what's going on.
Great. And I'm Miles O'Neill. I work for Reverie, which runs the Osmosis Grants Program.
Oh, we're live. Thank goodness. All right, who's ready to see mesh? All right. That was very, very enthusiastic. Y'all need some more coffee. All right, so, if you haven't heard of mesh security before, the TLDR is that you can cross-stake your assets to secure the internet of blockchains and earn additional rewards. So let's see what that looks like, First things first, obviously got to connect my wallet. Keplr, love Keplr. Pray to the demo gods? Yes. So this is our mesh dashboard. The MVP. It'll look a lot nicer in another month. And this is fully open source, so part of the expectation is, we're going to have a bunch of UI kits. If you're working on a staking UI or dashboard or something like we saw Sunny present, during his opening talk, the idea is that anyone can integrate the mesh. And here's just an example. So we have a list of our different assets. There's 2 chains in this mesh, right? We have Osmosis and we got Juno. So let's do some staking and cross-staking. Let's try it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the amount that I want, cross stakes. Let's just do, that sounds good. Great. You can select which chains you want to cross stake on. Right now there's only one, but you can imagine, Stargaze and Axelar and all the chains eventually. We click next. A big part of mesh security is that it's built around delegators rather than around validators or some low-level SDK kind of thing. This is great because that means we can bring mesh to more ecosystems like Polkadot potentially. But here I'm going to select a validator on the Osmosis chain. Mesh Osmosis 1, that seems very like a great validator pick. On the Juno chain, I'm also going to select a validator to delegate to. And great. Now I got a nice little summary page. And we can see I'm about to cross-stake, 3,413 Osmo, and I'm going to, put it on these chains, and yeah, let's pray to the demo gods. All right, so here we go. We got our transaction. There's a couple of smart contracts calls in there. Awesome. We're going to approve the transactions being broadcasted, and then we're going to wait like 30 seconds for the IBC transaction to be relayed. So while this is happening, I want to just give a few shout outs. First of all, to the Confio team. The Confio team is absolutely amazing and have been a huge part in making Mesh real. The second one is to OSMO with Starship. That's all this infrastructure is running on, you know, some amazing, like he was up until like 4 a.m. multiple nights, like, you know, getting Mesh working with real chain binaries, real relayers, like, yeah, very awesome. And then lastly, Joseph with Swift Protocol was also working tirelessly to help make this like front end experience. And let me just reload. Live demos are always fun. Oh no. All right, well, one more time. Pray the demo gods. There we go. So now we can see the new Osmo that we've cross-staked is now finally reflected in our dashboard. And we'll polish out all this stuff when it really goes live, but you know. And we also have some rewards, you know. So, okay, so we just cross-staked we just secured the interchain. It was that easy. You know, mesh security sounds like this really complicated thing, but it doesn't really have to be. It's like, you already know staking UI, you already know picking validators, right? It's like, it's the same thing, you know. So let's claim some rewards. So we have actually, you know, $34 of pending rewards from cross-staking our Osmo. So we're going to approve that. That's also going to be broadcasted. We're also going to wait a little bit again. But, oh, I forgot to call out one more person, and it's DesignDAO, Julius from DesignDAO. Amazing work designing a whole, like, and this is just the first version. He's got this really rich dashboard and really awesome like UX for like mesh cross-staking that we're going to be unveiling more and more over time. And yeah, I just claimed my rewards, and so yeah, I guess the moral of the story is mesh sounds really complicated, but it's actually not, right? Like, it's kind of a lot of stuff that people are already familiar with, things like staking, and it has the same risks, right? You have to pick your validator, and you know, maybe it's time to like, we can just like leave this up for like people to look at, or we can go back to, you know, maybe we can start having a conversation about it.
Yes, and again, Julius, thank you for making that look so easy. And I might ask you actually to go over to the architecture slide on the other tab there.
Oh yeah, totally. Let's get that up.
Perfect. So starting off, I think it would be great if Mauro from Confio, who has really led the back-end development, could walk people through what's going on under the hood here. And I'll let you just speak to the architecture.
Okay. Yes, as Jake said, the concept is not complicated, okay? It's the idea of cross-staking your assets. The implementation is a little bit more complex because of IBC and all the back and forth between the two chains, but let me give you an overview of the architecture at a high level, okay? Basically, we have two sides, the provider side and the consumer side. And the provider side has a vault in which you basically deposit your collateral. And that collateral can be used for local staking and cross-staking to remote chains at the same time, okay? The idea here is simple. It's, the funds are there. They are being locked because they are being staken. So why not use them at the same time in multiple chains? And the architecture reflects that. We are using IBC. This is possible because we have IBC as a cross-blockchain protocol, and that simplifies the not sending assets. We are never sending assets, but just referencing assets across chains. Okay.
That's great. And really the main difference between something like this, which is really bottoms up in nature, versus ICS, which is top down in nature, is that the power lies with the delegates, right? the validators are not required to stand up new hardware. You're just restaking your capital to an existing validator on the other chain.
Yes, exactly. The difference with the ICS replicated security, I think you're talking about that,
Yes.
is that here every chain has its own validator set. Okay, it's the stakers, the delegators that can cross-stake across chains. But every chain has its validator set and therefore has some level of governance. Okay, the power is still in those validators for the chain, and it's being, let's say, granted to them through the stakers.
It's fantastic. And maybe one more shout out, and I'll let Jake speak to the work they're doing, but Cosmology's been another amazing partner to build a lot of front-end tooling for this. And Jake, maybe you can speak to the use case of, what Cosmology is doing versus this independent UI that we just demoed.
Yeah, so the independent UI is just an example implementation of mesh security. It shows how it's done. Cosmology is doing wonderful work to build awesome, reusable UI components that make it super easy to build a mesh UI, right? This kind of work will probably go into what Sunny showed off during his talk. Any wallet providers like Keplr or Leap Wallet, anyone who's already providing a staking UI, we're going to make it super easy through Cosmology to implement mesh security in your already existing staking UI.
It's awesome. So the combination of those two front ends, you can basically capture any type of user. And maybe just taking a step back, I'd like to speak a little bit more about why we're doing this. And I think, Chris, you're someone who's been deeply involved in the core development of the Cosmos stack for years. And I'm curious to kind of hear your perspective on mesh security broadly, and maybe more specifically, is this an idea that you guys have been thinking about for a long time, or is this a net new, novel idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partially both. Cosmos started always with this kind of polycentric political ideal of multiple autonomous zones, which wanted to control kind of their own internal operations, to have sovereign liveness, sovereign safety, but also interoperate with each other. I think, there wasn't at the time any sort of coherent economic theory for how that interoperation would work, right? Like proof of stake within one chain and one asset provides sort of incentive alignment mechanism, but it's less clear in the Cosmos, historically and at the moment, how to fund and coordinate, the production of public goods, just mutual cooperation between these different autonomous zones, right? Like the economics don't reflect that at the moment. The economics are just independent tokens on independent chains. And I think, honestly, that's kind of an inefficient world. It's a less fun world. We have all of these not very coordinated public goods that, we run into the free rider problem again, right? So I'm very interested in mesh security as, I think, bringing some old ideas and some new ideas together into a fusion, but really, the part that I think is critical is just to think about these economics of interchain coordination, right? I mean, even if we have a good ethos, right? This is the prerequisite. We need to want to coordinate and want to work together, but then we need to back it up with an economic accounting system that actually reflects and accounts for that value, right?
Yeah, this is actually what got me really excited about mesh security. Was less the security part or the interchain security part, but more the coordination mechanism. How can Osmosis and Juno have some shared alignment, and that extends to Cosmos Hub and Osmosis, right? And Atom Accelerator was also a great sponsor of this work and super supportive, which is really awesome to see, right? These collaborative vibes are what we really need as an ecosystem to get to the next level, right? And collaboration is how we come together to fund things like public goods and how we can create a better interchain identity and a better interchain culture. So
yes, stronger together, 100%. And Mario, I'll ask you to now just kind of walk through some of the use cases for mesh security. We just looked at Juno and Osmosis cross-staking, which are two relatively high market cap assets, but I think there's also some less obvious potential uses of this, and would love to just,
Yes, there are some, let's say, ideas about use cases. We implemented this basic functionality of provider and consumer chains, but that will be one use case. Okay, you have one typically high cap chain that is supporting or securing a low level or lower level cap chain, but that can also be do it bilaterally. Okay, the consumer can turn to be a provider for the provider. Nothing prevents that. Basically, a bidirectional link between them that strengthens security for the entire thing or combination of blockchains. And then you can have a full mesh. Nothing prevents to use this link between provider-consumer against multiple chains in any kind of network that you want. It can be a star-shaped, it can be fully meshed, it can be directional in one relation and bidirectional in others, etc., etc. Okay, and then there are let's say imaginative use cases. There are some in the documentation that, by example, you can have DAOs that are migrating in Juno to their own chain, okay? Then they can bootstrap their own validator set with their own token, but depend on Juno for securing the chains, okay? Until they basically get some traction with the staking on their native token or not, depending on their governance decisions. And then you can see also the opposite, let's say, schema, in which a number of chains, smaller or bigger, it doesn't matter, are interested in supporting and securing a common good blockchain. Okay? A blockchain that provides some shared good, like a name service. It could be also distributed storage, anything that you can, or shared storage that you can have a blockchain for, that can be secured by multiple chains that are interested in supporting this name service. And name service or service in general, or shared good. And I think there are many more, okay? I think people, when this gets more traction, it's more used to it, they will be more creative and imaginative with extra use cases.
I think that's great. I mean, what I imagine here is we'll have these smart contract applications that launch on a chain with existing users and complementary apps, and then when they're ready to graduate, say, to their own chain, a subset of the validator set can basically underwrite this new chain by standing up validators on whatever the new chain is, and then they'll have their delegators, if they want to, restake to bring over the economic security. I think that's a really exciting use case because it provides a much easier path, basically, for these applications to eventually get to their own chains. And I'd say, just moving on a little bit to what this actually looks like in its implementation. And Jake, I think there's a lot of design choices to be made. There's a lot of, I would say, economic agreements to be made, and these will all happen through governance. And so, once we now have an MVP of a live demo, and in a few months we'll be ready to bring this to mainnet. So, what can people expect from a governance perspective? What decisions will these communities need to make, and how will they kind of be negotiated?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I think we'll just have to kind of figure out a lot of it as we go, right? And governance will be really slow. There's a lot of parameters to mesh security, right? There's the voting power cap parameter, for example. If you have a really large chain like Cosmos Hub, for example, that's much bigger than many of the most Cosmos chains, right? And so, a voting power cap, you could have a 5% voting power cap or a 10% voting power cap. That's going to be something that will be up for negotiation with these different chains. Now, if you're running mesh in more of a kind of typical consumer configuration, you might have 100% of the voting power, right? But I think many chains will have to figure out for each chain what's a good voting power cap. Another parameter that's quite relevant is there's actually a discount in mesh security that's built in as a parameter. So the idea is that when I'm cross-staking Juno to secure Osmosis and vice versa, the native token of the chain should have a bit more weight to it, right? The native Osmo, should have a bit more, weight than native Juno. So, these are kind of some of the high-level parameters, the voting power cap, what the discount is. I assume that probably the first couple of negotiations will be a little bit harder, as we kind of have to create a template for this. But after that, we'll start having some kind of patterns that people will adopt and good templates going forward. And a lot of it will be determined on which two chains it is. Like, is this a project that was incubated out of Juno? It might have more favorable mesh terms. There's also going to be like a life cycle to this. Like Sunny's talked often about mesh drops, the idea that you could launch a chain and instead of just doing a big airdrop, you just have really, really heavy mesh incentives at the beginning. But I think it'll be look very different, like for example, between like Osmosis and like Cosmos Hub, for example, where two very established chains and communities, like, you know, and it'll be a long, fun discussion.
It will.
But
it will.
Yeah.
A lot of these parameters are continuous, right, as opposed to discrete. Or like, I could imagine it being much easier to negotiate if you have some slightly altered version of governance that's built for continuous parameter selection, like does private voting and takes the median of people's parameter choices or something like this.
We're working on cool things like that at DAO, but yeah, no, I think those things will definitely like evolve as the mesh evolves. And really, this is Mesh V1, right? This is actually, I think, the beginning of a whole new class of protocols, right? And there's like a lot more types of mesh protocols that I think will exist in the future. And I'm really excited to watch how it all evolves.
I am too. And another thing that got me excited, like Chris and I were talking the other day, and you know, I wasn't actually sure what your impression of mesh was at the time, and you said, I like mesh, but I think we can take it further, not just cross-staking assets, but cross-staking users. And I'd just love for you to kind of unpack exactly what you're thinking there, and why, you know, that would actually extend the benefits even further.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes as an armchair philosopher in denial, I find it helpful to zoom out and try and identify which things that look different might really be the same. And one of those things, I think, in the Cosmos ecosystem at the moment is identity. So Cosmos has two notions of identity. It has a notion of identity for chains, and it has a notion of identity for users. And these two notions are treated as categorically distinct, right? Like we build different protocols for them. We use IBC, but we have like accounts for users, but IBC for blockchains. We think about them differently. You know, we think about chains as like having these large, you know, complex governance structures. We think about users as just running Keplr. But in essence, they're actually the same. They're both coming to consensus on decisions from the perspective of the rest of the network. They are issuing an ordered stream of messages, whether it be over IBC or from signatures in their user account. And they are economically interdependent, right? The chains are, you know, there are different levels of scale, right? The chains are communities. They're producing public goods at a kind of community level of scale. But what is a chain but some kind of group identity, right? It's an identification as a single organism, right? Which is just the same thing that an individual is. So one interesting generalization, I think you can view mesh security in like CoFi. I think Cosmos people are familiar with CoFi is really two sides of the same coin applied to these different notions of identity. So mesh security is trying to build a kind of accounting system for economic interdependence and sort of cross-staking and this sort of thing between blockchains, between the like level of identity of these large chains using IBC. And something like CoFi is trying to build a system that reflects economic interdependency and accounts for it between users and businesses, right? But maybe we can build a system that just does both and allows us to see this like commonality across these different levels of scale.
Yeah, I get so excited about that. Like, underlying mesh is this like kind of technical term called liens, right? And liens are just kind of generally useful, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of cross-staking. This is literally just like sort of maybe putting up collateral. Like maybe you have to put up like collateral to like join some DAO or some community, right? And that collateral might be slashed under like certain conditions. And you know, there's really this whole, we've built this first version around this idea of like, you know, between like sovereign chains and entities, right? But there really is a lot more to explore in that like between users, between DAOs, between organizations kind of aspect as well.
Fascinating, and thank you for unpacking that, because now I have a much better understanding of what we talked about in our 30-second conversation. And I guess just to finish off, I think folks are probably very curious about the timeline of when we'll actually see this to mainnet. And as you know, the lead of the backend development, I think you're probably in the best place to be able to speak to that. And so, if you could give any hints as it relates to timeline, I think that'd be great.
Yes, we have a minimum viable product now that is working, and but there are a couple of missing functionality. Okay, we need to implement slashing properly, which is fundamental, because the entire idea of collateral is because it's something that can be slashed. We want to do it off-chain because of security concerns and governance issues, so it will require some time. And then we need a price oracle, a good price oracle. Now this version is using something like a hard-coded ratio between the chains. And
yeah, that's another actually parameter that I forgot to mention is like the price oracle is, there's a couple options, right? And that's something that two chains, when they come together and make an agreement, can choose, you know, and might be part of the decision is which price oracle to use. And there's, you know, Osmosis TWAP, there's Ojo, there's like, you know, band protocol, there's a, yeah, sorry.
yeah, then there are some issues there because the price oracle or the DEX providing this oracle can be in the consumer chain or in the chain or couldn't be there. And then the IBC will have to be used to query price information, so it gets a little bit more complex. I don't know for sure when it will be done. Okay, it's difficult to provide estimates, but I estimate about 2 to 3 months development time with the holidays now in August, etc., etc. So it's still some time, but it will be there.
Luckily, we do have an MVP, and we can just start testing it, right? And that's what's really exciting. And I'm really hoping to like just throw up a degen version on like Juno and Chihuahua. Yeah, that could just be fun. Like, let's play around a little bit, you know, before we do, you know, the big leaks. Yes. But, you know.
Yeah, this is another important aspect that we want to test everything and simulate different scenarios, so that we can, when we launch this mainnet, we are sure that it will not have some side effect or some unexpected behavior. No? It will take, that also will take some time.
It's really exciting, and you know, I think David previewed Bitcoin restaking earlier this morning, and you know, we're working on that as well as Ethereum restaking. So hopefully, we'll have some more exciting announcements to show you guys in the next few weeks on that front. But yeah, that's all I had for today. Any parting thoughts, guys?
I can't wait to see Bitcoin and Ether secure the interchain.
Yeah.
Sorry to be the old guy, but we got to be a little careful about this fractional reserve security thing, because we're dealing with heterogeneous clocks, and you don't want the original Cosmos proof of stake incentive model was designed around uncorrelated faults, like that stake would be securing collateral on one chain only, or collateral would be securing one chain only, providing a disincentive for double signing. And I think this changes that in ways that we probably want to model a little bit, like price the tail risks appropriately.
I mean, yeah, definitely, and we are going to be getting a lot of stuff audited. I really am a big fan of starting small with mesh before we, like, walking before we run, right? Like, doing, like, tests, like, I mean, meme coins and meme chains are great for this, right? Like, let's play around and make sure we learn stuff, and also be realistic about expectations. Like, yes, I do see a world in which it's a vision, right? Like, Bitcoin and Ethereum being able to help secure the interchain. We're still ways away from that, so.
Yep, absolutely. So it's a really exciting design space, and there's lots more to come. So thank you guys so much for coming today.